This is Debt Free in 30, where every week we take 30 minutes and talk to industry experts about debt, money, and personal finance. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Most of the time here on Debt Free in 30, I have guests on that I agree with. I may play devil's advocate and ask questions that sound like I'm disagreeing with them, but most of the time I'm on the same page as my guests. Not today. Today my guest is a guy I've known for many years. He's a really good guy, really smart, but there is a topic we disagree on, and that's what we're going to talk about today. As many of you know, November is Financial Literacy Month here in Canada, and one of the topics that comes up every year is how should we teach financial literacy in schools? I think that's the wrong question. I think a better question is there any point in teaching financial literacy in schools? I have two teenage sons. Both of them are in high school, and I was once a teenager in high school myself, so I have a vague understanding of what it's like to be a teenager. If you're a teenager in high school, you most likely don't have a full-time job, you don't have much money, and you don't have access to credit. So is there really any point in teaching a high school student about RRSPs and RESPs and investing? I'm not convinced that teaching those concepts to someone who may or may not use them for 10 years has much benefit. It's like learning French. If you don't use it, you lose it. How many of us took years and years of French in school but can hardly speak a word of it today? Well, most of us, I bet. And that's my opinion on teaching financial literacy in schools. I agree that as Canadians, our level of financial literacy is appallingly low. The facts speak for themselves. We're carrying record levels of debt. I see an increasing number of people getting payday loans, which are almost always a horrible idea. There's almost always a better option, and yet people get them. It may be desperation, but in a lot of cases, it's a lack of knowledge about how interest rates work. As a society, we lack basic financial knowledge, so teaching it is a good idea. I'm just not convinced that teaching it to high school students who can't apply it right away is a useful exercise. But maybe I'm wrong. I'm not a high school teacher, so let's ask someone who actually understands the world of high school education. Let's get started by welcoming my guest. Who are you and what's your background?
Hi, Doug. Good morning. My name's Dave Mitchell, and I taught high school math here in Kitchener for 30 years at Grand River Collegiate and at Cameron Heights. And these days, since retiring from the classroom in 2004, I speak at educational conferences in Canada and the United States, sharing ideas with teachers on how to make math more engaging and interesting for students. I also am involved in educational publishing, and I have a series of booklets, CDs, and DVDs, all of which are based around that same theme of making the study of math more engaging for students.
And obviously math has a lot to do with what we're talking about today. And what I'm going to do is put in the show notes over at hoyes.com links to all the stuff that you're talking about. So if people are interested in finding out more about what you're talking about, the stuff that you've done, they can find it there. So let's, before you and I get into a fist fight here, let's start with the basics. What is being taught in schools today? And I understand that you can't give me an overview of everything that's taught all over North America, but why don't we concentrate on what is being taught in Ontario, which is probably comparable to other parts of the country with respect to financial literacy? What is in the curriculum now, to the best of your knowledge?
Well, historically, what happened was the students who were not in the upper academic stream got most of the financial part of the curriculum presented to them, and the students who were in the straight academic math stream got very little of it, and which seemed odd because students, as you know, are always asking the question, why should we learn this? What value does it have? And actually, the application of math in financial matters is one of the most common, everyday, hands-on, you can get a grip on it type of things that you can imagine. And it's a perfect response to students. Let's take an in-depth look at this so you understand the nuts and bolts of financial math calculations, simple interest, compound interest, annuities. How are these things actually worked out? Where do they come from? How are the calculations done? And my experience was was that students loved and appreciated that aspect of mathematics. It was something concrete, something they could get a grab on. And years ago, when we had grade 13, and I'm going back now many years, within grade 13, there was a course called Math of Investment, and it was one of the best courses in all of high school math for hands-on understanding of the way financial calculations are made. And the students who took that course loved it, and many of them went on to take studies relating to financial math, accounting and the like, that sort of thing. They were so intrigued by the calculations, the finance of math, that they were motivated to go and do it. And sadly, that course got dropped from the curriculum. And I remember thinking to myself, what a mistake, what a mistake. So that's what happened historically. Just checking with a friend of mine who's a math department head here in town a week or so ago in preparation for speaking with you today, I found that there is still math of finance discussions in the basic math and applied math courses, and there is some in the academic math, but probably it would be such that you could argue there's room for a lot more.
And so if I'm a high school student, you're talking about two different streams here. Mm-hmm. The basic stream and the advanced stream, I think is what you're calling them? Or?
Yeah, well, we sort of have a math for everyday life, and the terminology changes from time to time, but it's a math for everyday life, and then an applied math, and then an academic math.
So there's kind of three different categories to it. And so math for everyday life, what are we talking about? I'm
sure it would be calculations that are fairly straightforward and everyday, like how does simple interest work? And there's an uncomplicated or simple formula for simple interest, as you know. And the students would also look at compound interest. And with calculators being the way they are now, it's fairly straightforward to show a student how to do those calculations. So you could say, if I'm investing so much money for such a length of time at 10% per annum, compounded semi-annually, how much do I end up with? They would also look probably at payments, car payments and the like, and I would think more likely they would work from tables. I'm not sure on that one, but I think they would work from tables, say in the math for everyday life, to figure out a rough idea of what a mortgage payment would be or car payment would be. It wouldn't be too intricate a mathematical look at it, but it would be enough to get a sense of what these things would turn out to be.
And is that something every student in high school would get, or just people in a certain stream?
Well, once again, my understanding there is that certainly in math for everyday life, there would be a look at it at a very fundamental and everyday level. In the applied math, I believe that's the case. And in the academic math, I think there is a look at it, and probably in some cases a more advanced look at it. I know my friend who is the math department head also teaches IB math, the International Baccalaureate math, and he said they have quite an in-depth look at the mathematics of the financial calculations for annuities and the like. So they would really be getting into some sophisticated math, and they have at least a discussion for, I would imagine, several weeks on how these things work.
So there is some stuff being taught today. There might not be a huge amount of consistency. It may depend on what program, what courses you're taking. So let's get back to my basic point, which is, well, isn't that all really kind of a waste of time? So simple interest, okay, I get that. I think that's a concept you can teach someone and they will remember because it's not that hard. It's simple. That's why it's called simple interest. But what about the more complicated things? When you try to apply those to real life, if it's something I'm not going to be using for years and years and years, is there really any point teaching that?
I think what you're doing, Doug, is planting a seed. And if you introduce students to this and you spend a little bit of time, you discuss it, you look at it, you analyze it, and you give them a sense of confidence that they actually have a grip on it, then later in life, they may not remember specifically how to do those calculations in detail. But as you well know, with things like YouTube, you can simply search for a tutorial on calculation of compound interest, for example, and somebody there would present a tutorial that would be a good discussion of how these calculations are made. And if the seed had been planted and now you've got the refresher at your fingertips through YouTube, I think you can fly with some of these things.
So do you need to plant the seed? Because I totally agree with what you're saying about modern technology. And I know, one of my sons in particular learns all sorts of stuff on YouTube. That he's a visual learner. That's how he does it. And he tells me all sorts of stuff. He's way over my head. I have no clue what he's talking about. So maybe that's the answer. What we really need in all areas of life is a just-in-time learning system. So, okay, I'm now old enough that I can go out and buy a car, finance a car. Well, maybe now's the time then that I go on YouTube, find some videos, learn it, and be ready to go. Does it really matter what I learned in high school 10 years earlier?
Well, life goes by so quickly, and you can easily miss the boat on something. And let me give you a concrete example. A friend of mine, a fellow who grew up with me here in town, who has had his working career in New York City, after he had established his career and was working for a number of years, he learned by chance that there was an opportunity to put away money from his paycheck on a regular basis into a deferred compensation fund. And over the years that he was contributing to this grew to a sum of about $400,000 that he will be able to enjoy and use throughout his retirement. And he said the only way he even knew of the power of this and the power of, say, something like compound interest was not because he had studied it in school. He regretted that he had never even learned about it when he was in high school, but he learned from a friend. And then when he started to investigate what went on when you have compound interest working in your favor, he was astounded, and he started telling his friends, and some of them, even though they had only, say, 10 years to go in their working career, started to put money aside and were absolutely amazed at what it produced. And they had the regret that they didn't know earlier that this was available and the power that it had.
But if he had learned it earlier, would it have made an impression on him?
Well,
I guess we don't know the answer.
No, we don't know. But he's the type where that seed could have made a huge difference for him. And he told me, had I known about this at the beginning of my working career, he said, I would have been able to grow that fund into $1 million rather than $400,000. So once again, there are lots of things that one might study in school at any level, and you have a hard time connecting A to B. I learn A and therefore I can do B, and it helps me accomplish C in my life. However, I think all learning is of value, and some of these things that are practical, that students seem to be clamoring for, I think that's a real key to sort of grab hold of them and say, look, there's more to this math than just figuring out how to solve a quadratic equation or to solve a geometric series or to understand a geometric series. You can start applying it, and then look what this can mean over the course of your life. It can make a huge difference.
So the gist of your argument is education in whatever form it is maybe isn't the end goal. It plants a seed, and that seed leads to something else, which leads to something else, which leads to something else. And therefore, you can't draw a linear relationship to it. So if we were teaching more of this stuff in high schools, elementary schools, whatever, then at least by the time we got to later life, the light bulb might come on, and we might go, yeah, I have some vague recollection of something like that. And therefore, it does have value. So I'm taking a much too simplistic view of it, is what you're saying.
Well, I think so. If you start with simple bank accounts and deposits versus withdrawals for young students, and how to write checks, even though checks are going out of fashion, but you can have quite a discussion even with very young kids about budgeting and that sort of thing, and start it off. And then I think by high school age, it is appropriate to know the basics of these things that we've discussed, and at the level at which the student can understand and deal with mathematical concepts, the complexity of what you look at could increase. And I've just seen too many lights come on over the time that I was teaching in the classroom, and students saying, thank you for showing me this, because I have an understanding now, and I had an example of a grade 13 student. Once again, this is ancient history, but here's what happened. We had looked at how to calculate mathematically the amount that a car payment should come out to each month, given all the parameters. So this student went along with his mom and dad when they were looking at purchasing a car. And the salesperson said, okay, here are the conditions, and your monthly payment should work out to $250 a week. And this is a while back. So the student hauled out pencil, paper, had the calculator, and went through the calculation and said, no, it should be $15 less a month. And the person who was the salesperson said, no, I've checked in the table here, and my calculation is correct. So the student was firm about this, and the fellow went back to his tables and said, I've made a mistake. You're correct. So the student came in the next day and was so happy to report that he had saved his parents $15 a month over the course of the payment schedule for this car. And he knew how to figure it out. That knowledge was power for him.
And it was something that was applied really quickly. So, well, okay, let me throw a different concept at you then. I agree that understanding how to do the math is important, and understanding, the difference between simple interest, compound interest, and those are mathematical concepts. But I think what's even more important is the ability to think. And I think the illustration you gave just illustrated that. The student was sitting there and he was skeptical. He didn't say, oh, well, this salesman knows what he's talking about, so I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. He must be right. The student, in fact, said the exact opposite. Well, let me double check. And so I think if I was designing a financial literacy program in school, yes, I'd want to teach the math, but even more importantly, I'd want to teach skepticism. And I don't know if that's the word for it or not, but not taking things at face value. When I'm looking at a proposal from a salesman on a loan, I should have the wherewithal to ask questions, question assumptions, and whatnot. Am I right on that point?
I would certainly agree. And in general, I would hope that education produces a healthy amount of skepticism, in the sense that one does not take something without thinking it through and perhaps checking facts. And with the availability of the internet now, checking facts and figures, that's so much more readily available than it was years ago. But yes, no, you're certainly correct in that. I would argue that's part of it. Now, I have a very interesting anecdote too about a personal situation that happened years and years and years ago when my wife and I have 3 children. When they were all very young, we had somebody selling insurance come to the door, knocked on the door, and I ended up having about a 3-hour discussion with this person. And the family allowance check, he had a plan, take this family allowance check and deposit, it was either all or some of it every month, and here's how much money you would have by the time your student reached age 17, 18 to go to post-secondary school. And I looked at the calculations and they weren't making sense to me. So I did what my student had done, hauled out the calculator, took the pencil and paper, made the calculation, and he was incorrect. He was incorrect, and he said, no, I'm correct. Here are my tables. It says right here. This is what the result is. And I said, no, you're interpreting your tables incorrectly. And I showed him why he was interpreting the tables incorrectly. He was inadvertently adding an extra year to the calculation, just the way the tables were set up. It wasn't fraudulent. He was just mistaken. And when I showed him the mathematics of why it worked, he was amazed. And this was a young person at the beginning of his career. And I said, have you not studied this aspect of financial calculations? He said, no. So I spent the next 2 hours volunteering to teach him. I didn't have to do it. I just wanted to do it. And he thanked me when he left the door. I didn't end up taking him up on his offer, but I felt kind of good because I thought, well, for the rest of his career, at least he will be interpreting his tables correctly because he knows the math behind it.
And that's pretty important. So, so just to conclude then, what you're saying then is, yes, this is important. And even though it may not flow all the way through life, specifically in that format, you're planting a seed at the educational level. And if that also leads to a healthy skepticism, that's a good thing. And that's really what we need in our school system.
Yes, I would agree with that. And I would also think that it would be important for people involved in education to continue to have a good overview and a look at what's in the curriculum from time to time, and then saying, are we keeping up? Should we be adjusting? Should we be doing more? And my feeling is we could probably do even more.
There's always more that can be done because the world does change very quickly. That's an excellent note to wrap up the segment. Dave, thanks very much for being here.
You're welcome, Doug. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be back with the next segment right here on Debt Free in 30.
If you're struggling with debt, you have options. A consumer proposal is a legal process that allows you to settle your debts for a portion of what you owe. To see if this solution is right for you, go online to consumer-proposals.org, a website all about proposals. Consumer-proposals.org, a great place to start on your way to becoming debt-free.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Welcome back. It's time for the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. On today's show, Dave Mitchell, who has 30 years of experience as a high school teacher, said that teaching financial literacy in high school is very important because even if students don't remember everything they're taught, by planting the seed of knowledge in high school, Dave believes that we can equip students for success later in life. That's the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. So, what do I think of Dave's opinion? Well, as I said at the start of the show, I don't see a lot of point in spending a lot of time in high school teaching kids concepts that they will quickly forget. However, I am willing to concede that Dave's concept of planting a seed does make some sense. If you're exposed to concepts like compound interest in high school, even if you don't fully grasp the intricacies of the calculation, it does at least allow you to know what questions to ask. Dave's example of the student who helped his parents when they were getting a car loan is a great story, primarily because the student was skeptical. He didn't just take the salesman's word for it. He knew which assumptions to question, he asked questions, he did the math to back up his thoughts, and as a result, he got his parents a better deal. That's financial literacy in action, and that to me is the perfect result. A student who understands the basic math, but more importantly, also knows when to be skeptical and ask questions. That's our show for today. Full show notes are available on our website, including links to everything we discussed today, including some good loan calculators and amortization calculators, and links to Dave Mitchell's website where he has lots of great resources for math teachers and students. All of those resources are at hoyes.com. That's HOYES.com. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.